What was Israel's response to God's providence in the Song of Moses? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Deuteronomy 32. We're going to be reading from verses 7 to 18. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Deuteronomy 32, beginning of verse 7. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you. Your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High divided their inheritance to the nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the boundaries of the peoples according to the numbers of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion in his people, Jacob is the place of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land and in a wasteland, a howling wilderness. He encircled him. He instructed him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. As an eagle stirs up his nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings, so the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign God with him. He made him ride in the heights of the earth, that he might eat the produce of the fields. He made him draw honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock, curds from the cattle and milk of the flock, with fats of lambs and rams of the breed of Bashan and goats with the choicest wheat. And you drank wine, the blood of the grapes. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, you grew thick, you were obese. Then he forsook God who made him and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons, not to God. To gods they did not know. To new gods, new arrivals that your fathers did not fear. Of the rock who begot you, you are unmindful, and have forgotten the God who fathered you. In our last two lessons, we've been looking at what is often referred to as the Song of Moses. In chapter 31, God commanded this song to be composed and sung before Israel as a witness of God against them and what would befall them when they fell away from God and served idols. That means that the song is directed principally to contrasting the unchanging faithfulness of the Almighty with the anticipated perversity and unfaithfulness of his people. As we've discussed previously, this song can be properly divided into 6 parts. Part 1, the introduction, is found in verses 1 to 3, in which the importance of the doctrine to be delivered is announced. In Part 2, found in verses 4 to 6, which we covered in the last lesson, the blamelessness and excellency of Jehovah are placed in contrast with the corruptness and perversity of Israel. Part 3, in verses 7 to 18, which we will cover in this lesson, the folly and ingratitude of the rebellious people is discussed. Part 4 covers verses 19 to 23 and is where the purpose of God to punish and reject the rebellious generation is declared. Part 5 is found in verses 24 to 34 and is where the fulfillment of this purpose in the judgments which should come upon the rebels is discussed. And finally, Part 6, found in verses 35 to 43, describes the judgment which God would execute on the enemies of Israel and the mercy he would show to his servants. Coming out of verse 7, we come to the discussion of what God did for Israel and their ingratitude in how they responded. When it comes to being ungrateful, one of the reasons it happens in the first place is forgetfulness. When children become ungrateful for the things they have received, it is often because they forget the amount of work and sacrifice that their parents had to put in order to provide for them. If the children had remembered this, they would have been more likely to have been thankful, which is why this section calls on Israel to remember. The song itself was to be a reminder to Israel of what God had done for them, but in the future the song could have been seen as just another song, with no thought really put into understanding the words of it. Thus, if someone in Israel really wanted to know what the song was about and what the Lord had done for Israel in the past, they were to ask their fathers and elders, in other words, their leaders. How would the leaders have known? Because they would have been told from their parents, who were told from their parents about the history of the nation. Add to that the elders would have access to the law itself in order to make judgments, a law that also contained the history of Israel, as we've been studying thus far in Genesis through Deuteronomy, meaning the elders would have a good source to consult for this type of information. What Israel was to remember is how God's providence had worked all throughout their years. Moses said that God separated the sons of Adam and set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. This is talking about the call of Abraham all the way back in Genesis 12. Up until this point, Israel was not called to be a nation, but after this they were. And throughout their history, God has always provided for his people, sometimes miraculously and sometimes through natural means, but he always provided for them. How God provided for his people could be compared to how an eagle provides for its nest, in that an eagle always ensures that the nest is taken care of. And how would Israel respond to this show of love? It is said that Jeshurun grew fat and kicked, and then forsook God. In other words, they became ungrateful. The name Jeshurun comes from a Hebrew word meaning righteous, and is used in Scripture as a name for Israel. In using the name Jeshurun in verse 15, Moses is being ironic in that he is censuring the wicked nation of Israel for what they are doing by recalling to their memory how they should be acting, which is righteous before God. God had provided Israel with everything, yet Israel foolishly would be serving and sacrificing to other gods that did nothing for them. This is said to be sacrificing to demons, a sentiment that Paul will use in his letters to the Corinthians. God did not deserve to be treated this way. He deserved to be worshipped and praised. How would God react to this? We'll find out as we continue looking at the Song of Moses, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 19 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.